So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read this. This is not a discussion. Okay, we can talk about it afterwards if you want to, but this isn't a discussion while I'm reading it. I'm literally just going to read it. I might add some detail as I'm going, rather than just read it verbatim. But this is purely so that I can easily stick this on YouTube, because otherwise I have to sit down and read it for a special video. And if I do this like this, then I can just stick it straight on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, hello, I'm reading this live on Twitch. I'm a Twitch streamer, by the way. I'm not a YouTuber, so please do come and find me on Twitch, twitch.tv/StatsBloke. Not a YouTuber. Okay. So let me read through. The first section is bugs and issues. Not necessarily all bugs, but things that I thought needed highlighting. The first one is the new sound. So they got rid of the boost sound and replaced it with a very similar sound to tell you, according to the notes, apparently it's something like when a plane transitions from high altitude to low altitude and therefore becomes dangerous to you potentially, you should hear an sound. But it's bugged, and it actually plays, as far as I could tell, every single time an enemy plane gets spotted on the map. I even found a couple of examples of it just playing for no apparent reason whatsoever. And because there was an enemy carrier alive, I think it might have been playing because someone else could see the plane. Like they were next to the carrier and it took a plane off, and so it went It's a bit weird. So there's obviously some kind of bug with that. You don't need that. You need an emote. If only there was an emote. There literally is an emote. Flak is mentioned all over the interface. It needs to be removed, and Wargaming don't have a particularly great track record, albeit that's Leicester mostly. They don't have a particularly great track record with updating stuff text-wise after things go live, so that needs to be said, I think. The text on the modified Def AA consumable still mentions the blinding effect from last year's test, and it hasn't been removed. There seems to be something wrong with AA activation. Me and Ray were talking about this while I was streaming the test, which you can go and watch, by the way. If you just do !CV test, the first link is the VOD to when I was doing the testing. Several times, and there's an example in the text here, and I can actually, if you want to, I might be able to actually put this in the chat right now for the Twitch viewers. If I remember, I'll stick it in the YouTube description. There would be planes inside my AA range. I was in Vermont in that particular clip. Inside my AA range, and they were marked as red on the HUD, which means that they should be coming down to recon or attack, or are there already. And now there is a transition period, but my experience of playing the carriers was that as soon as you start to make that descent, you start to get attacked by AA. Obviously, there is also an immunity period during the attack, but these planes weren't attacking. And so I saw this several times where planes were just flying around inside my AA range without being fired upon by my AA. So there's obviously some kind of problem there, either with the AA not firing when it should do, or the altitude of the planes being marked incorrectly on the HUD. One or the other must be true. So that's some kind of bug. I saw a few times where plane icons were missing. There was one instance where the planes literally disappeared. They were still on the minimap, but the icon and the actual graphic of the plane itself just completely disappeared. And there was another instance where a rocket strike was coming towards me, and all I could see was a square. So that's a bug. But no one clipped that, so I don't have a clip of that. Okay. So now some feedback on specifically surface play. The plane spotting HUD is difficult to see. I'm just going to read this. So the new plane spotting rows, so this is the icons over the top of your aiming HUD. It's a great addition because last year's test we had literally nothing other than just looking upwards and trying to physically gauge with no depth perception what the height was, which was impossible. So now we have this extra HUD, which is cool in theory. But the arrow indicators are so tiny that they're almost invisible. And also, the color change between orange, which indicates safe. Orange doesn't indicate safe to me, but orange indicates safe, like travel mode. Red indicates danger, recon or attack mode. The difference between those two colors is so small that even I, with my perfect color vision, was struggling to tell the difference and having to, you can actually see me doing it on the VOD, like leaning in to try and tell the difference between the orange and the red. If you are colorblind, which I know several of you are, you have no chance at all of telling the difference between those two things. So they need to do something. They need to increase the contrast. They need to make them completely different colors. They need to make the colors mean the things that they mean, although that's a very cultural thing because red doesn't necessarily mean danger in every culture. But they can use tonal contrast. They can use different symbols. They can have like a little pulse on the icon as it changes from one to the other. This is not a difficult problem to solve. Vision problems are extremely common in the general population and even more so in older gamers, which this game does attract. Automatic AA, so this is the AR thing, isn't achieving its goal, in my opinion. The automatic AA mechanic misses the mark. If the objective of these changes, the test as a whole, is to make interactions with planes feel better for surface ship players, making them feel like they're having an impact, the completely hands-off nature of this mechanic means that the player is going to completely ignore this effect and so has no feeling about it at all. Once there were other things happening in the match, I was having to aim, I was being shot at, I was having to steer, dodge torps, whatever. I was just completely unaware of what was going on with the status of my automatic AA. The very subtle indicator at the bottom of the screen got completely ignored, and I forgot it even existed as a mechanic for most of the time. And I played for 8.5 hours. As it is, it may as well be a hidden mechanic to simply deter CVs from making repeated strikes. But even playing the CVs, which I did quite a lot of, I was unaware of the effects as I couldn't see the status on the ships I was attacking, so it wasn't a deterrent, as it wasn't in my mind. So from both sides of the coin, it's failing its goal if I've assumed the goal correctly. Additionally, when it did activate, I'm assuming that it was active a lot of the time while there were no planes around. I don't know because I wasn't tracking the status for all the reasons I've just mentioned. Because it would have activated while I was being attacked, and then the planes go away, leaving the effect active where there's no planes around, which is certainly what happened last year. So, assuming that increased enjoyment and a feeling of agency is the objective of these changes as a whole, then it would be better if it worked the same way as the chargeable F keys on some surface ships, in my opinion. Have a very visible charging UI, like the Hanover thing, for example, with a sound upon full charge, so duk 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 ba-ding, and then let the player activate it when they want to, so they have some agency, so they feel like they're doing something. At the very least, give the player a more obvious feedback as to what's going on, so that they know when it's charging and they know when it's active, because that thing at the moment is way too subtle. I've seen Wargaming staff say that this would simply duplicate Def AA. Yeah, I agree with you, that would do. In which case, fine, don't have both things separately, just combine them. At least the player would then feel like they're actually doing something. The fact that it's instantly forgettable by both the surface ship and the CV players makes it pointless. It's not a deterrent, it's not giving me a feeling of agency as the surface ship, and it's not achieving my assumed goal of the test. There are going to be ads. I'm sorry, I'm just going to read through it. If you want to see this later, you're going to have to watch it on YouTube. Okay, AA immunity is half of the attack, and it feels bad. The AA immunity period feels weirdly long as the surface player, though that simply could be because the attacking planes aren't in AA for as long as they are on live, where you have to fight your way in through all the flak and everything. So the immunity period is a larger proportion of the time. It's weird to see 2 seconds of damage, then nothing for several seconds, and then damage again as the planes exit. And I have an example of that here, which I can paste in chat if you want to see what I'm talking about. This is again it's actually from the same match. So you see damage, damage, nothing, 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 damage, 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 and it just feels really weird. you're thinking, and I literally say it out loud, and maybe not during that clip, but I certainly say it during that interaction. Why aren't I doing any damage? It just looks really, really weird. You're not doing damage for about 50% of the attack, which feels really, really bad, and it just looks nonsensical. So I don't like that. I understand the mechanics, I just think it looks stupid. And it doesn't add to my feeling of doing something. AA range is bypassed. This is kind of me summarizing some other comments that I've seen, which I think I agree with, but I can't verify completely. I've also seen lots of comments from about the transition from high to low altitudes, so from travel to recon or attack, which allows CV players to bypass long-range AA completely. And this is certainly the feeling that I got as the carrier player. They can start their attacks inside that long-range AA, because with some attack runs, like bombers particularly, you're starting from almost above the target and then diving straight down with certain nations, particularly like Japanese, for example. And so you feel like you're just getting a free pass through that outer ring of AA, because you no longer have to do that risky thing of like darting through the flak. Presumably, the immunity period, so once I start my attack, I go into an immunity period, well, that's going to mostly happen during the short-range AA, meaning that the medium-range AA is pretty much the only thing which matters, for at least for some attacks. Because you can skip the long range with things like dive bombers, and then you're attacking and immune during the short-range AA. So does that mean that the short-range AA is not really doing anything? Does it mean the long-range AA is not really doing anything for some of the attacks? Would it therefore make sense, if that's true, to just get rid of short, medium, and long-range AA and just have AA? Just one range, it's the same DPS the whole way through. And it is what it is, because I don't see the point in having the 3 ranges anymore if you can skip half of them. Okay, CV play specifics. Unnecessary W holding. Why do I constantly have to hold down the W key to fly slightly faster in travel mode? I'm never going to want to do medium speed, so I'm holding down W most of the time when I'm not pressing S for some specific reason to slow down. There's no boost timer anymore. I can just do full speed as long as I like, but I have to hold down W to do it. So I have no reason to go back to the middle default speed, because I want to get places as quickly as I can to increase my DPS. As an older player with arthritis in my hands a little bit, this is very uncomfortable to have to hold down the key constantly. If I want to go faster still to escape things in an emergency situation, I have the R consumable to go even faster. And just make the fastest speed the default, let me slow down with S, and then let me use the R key to speed up if I need to. On like a time-limited basis, which is kind of equivalent then to what we have on live at the moment, where I don't have to hold down the W key all the time. I get rests in between while it recharges, which is still uncomfortable, but this is not the same amount of uncomfortable. It just seems completely pointless making the player hold down the key when it could just behave like a surface ship, more or less. So look after your older players. Flak, visual flak removal. The absence of flak makes AA feel less impactful, less dramatic, less scary, less cinematic. Oh my god. The visual absence of flak makes AA feel less impactful, less dramatic, less scary, less cinematic, and overall experience of both using and flying through AA less exciting, regardless of whether it's doing anything or not. It just detracts from the experience not having it there. One of my favorite things about AA is the visual effect of the flak burst. It just looks really cool. I love flying through the flak. I love dodging the flak as well as the carrier player. I quite like that mechanic. But I think DMC, someone I saw said this the other day, once you've learned how to dodge the flak, it becomes not a problem because you can always dodge the flak. But I like that process. But I just like visually the flak coming up, and as the surface ship player, I like seeing the flak bursts because it just feels better. So just if you don't want to have it as a mechanic, just put it back in as an animation because it just looks cool. Makes the game look cool. Okay. Overall impressions. I'm going to go through surface ship impressions and I'm going to go through CV impressions. So, These comments pertain specifically to random battles. I'm not talking about competitive or any other game mode. I'm talking specifically about random battles. I don't have an opinion about these changes for competitive. Other feedback above having been given, my overall impression was mostly positive when playing the surface ships. It's difficult to judge with some bugs and issues present, I mentioned them above, and when playing on a test server, obviously the playstyle is going to be very test server-ish. But the play was, with all player matches, was mostly as normal and it was enjoyable. The test felt more natural than last year's bewildering UI-less experience, particularly with the plane altitudes. I understood more of what was happening intuitively, although several issues still remain as I've described above, but it's a significant step in the right direction. The feeling that shooting down a plane on an attack run actually stops part of the attack, as it does with Russian-style CVs on live now, felt nice, and then that applies to all the carriers. You see the plane kills at the end of the match, and you know that that number is actually going to be a good proportion of that number is actually going to have had an impact on the attacks being stopped or reduced. Rather than what we have now on live, where those numbers, especially against certain carriers, will be just empty kills. The biggest change I noticed was to stealthy ships, so being able to play a ship which relies on concealment, like a torpedo destroyer, or I tried Kitakami as well, and feel a lot bolder in the way I was able to play because the risk of accidental spotting is significantly reduced, meant that I was able to play almost the same as I would have done in a non-CV match. When players are passive, because of the risk of CV spotting, so if I'm in a destroyer and it's a double CV game at the moment, I'm going to stay way back probably. It's less fun for everyone because there's just less interaction. The spotting change, so therefore the spotting change just feels pretty nice. I like that change. You can still get hunted by the CV, but the CV has a much more limited capacity to do this, and critically, they're much less likely to accidentally get you killed or just ruin your plans by flying over your head while being completely unaware that you were there, meaning that you can continue stalking, pushing, spotting, or whatever it is that you were doing while they just travel mode straight over your head. Because I get the impression on live that I'm quite often rumbled by carrier players who have no idea about situational awareness, and they have no idea I'm there, but they're still ruining my plans. There are still risks from the carriers, but they're much more predictable and counterable. It's a very nice middle ground. I still have to pay attention to the fact there's a carrier in the match, but it's not quite as much of a risk as it is currently on live. It also opens up an interaction which wasn't possible before, and I did try this. A destroyer is able to much more easily push up to a carrier without being detected, but once they're there, the risk from the CV hull's manual guns means that the interaction is more fun for both players. The destroyer player feels that they can make a play more easily, but the CV player feels like they have some possibility of defense beyond their planes, because obviously the default automatic secondaries are not particularly accurate. Whereas if you have some agency, going back to my point earlier about the AA, if you have agency, you feel better about the whole experience and you're more able to defend yourself. I must reiterate though, the automatic AA needs more player agency. It's pointless as implemented, it's instantly forgotten and not a deterrent to the CV player who has no reminder that it's there. Out of sight, out of mind. If you want players to feel like they're doing something, then you have to make them feel like they're doing something. The automatic AA made me feel nothing from either side of play. Alright, and then finally CV impressions. So I played about the same number of CV games and service games. Again, these comments pertain specifically to random battles. CV play felt very familiar. Last year's test made me never want to play the CVs again. I remember saying, if they implement this as it is live, I'm never playing CVs ever again. It felt horrible. Mainly due to the way that the attack runs felt like running down a long flight of stairs. It was just horrible. This test felt very similar to what we have on live now, and I felt like I was able to just jump straight into playing and attacking and whatever with my experience from live, plus some knowledge about how the spotting changes work. But that being said, there are some obvious differences. Flying out at the start of the match and not seeing anything, it just feels really weird. It doesn't feel weird to the surface players. I didn't think about that at all when I was in the surface ships, but to the CV player, it's really eerie. But this is probably just unfamiliarity, because once everyone gets used to the idea that that's how it's like, then it won't feel weird anymore. But when I got there, unfamiliarity aside, I found myself unsure what to do. But again, this is probably a familiarity thing. Do I try and guess where something is and make an attack? But then, like, when I click the button, I don't know where the ships are going to be, and then I have to react to it, which is kind of fun. It just felt really weird. Do I wait until some of my ships are in range and then try and do a little recon dip to see if I can get one of them to snipe something? Maybe. If I do that, I might as well attack while I'm there. I just wasn't kind of sure what to do. But I guess that's just a familiarity thing. Overall, I didn't really see the point in recon mode, given that you can transition straight into an attack state afterwards. I barely used it, although this is probably like, again, a familiarity and experience thing. I barely used it, and then only to see what it did. I felt I was getting less damage on average per game than on the live server, although only over a small number of games. The loss of planes during attack massively reduces the ability to simply throw planes at a target regardless of losses in exchange for damage. So I think, and my impression was that I was getting less damage overall, although there were exceptions. I found myself actively seeking lone ships far more on the test than on live, especially battleships, because they're just the ones that are visible. And so I go like, oh look, a lone battleship, let's go and attack that. I wonder if this lone ship preference, if I'm not alone, will cause a repeat of the blobbing tactic we saw for a while before the AA blob mechanics were brought in on live. Players were certainly blobbing on the test server, and in some carriers, Haku particularly, it made attacking any ship in that blob completely impossible. I couldn't get near it. However, as a proponent of asymmetrical game design, I feel that that's how it should be. I shouldn't be able to attack a group of ships without significant losses. However, if there is only a blob, I can't do anything, which feels really bad. And if there's a lone ship, that's going to be my target, and that player will then be more likely to blob up in future matches, because they'll learn that being alone means they get attacked by the carrier. So my intuition that blobs should not be able to be attacked by carriers doesn't really translate into game design, because it's going to cause blobbing. I also felt that most of the carriers felt very similar to each other because of the changes to fit into the test. Changes to the number of planes you get and the number of flights and all that kind of stuff that made them all feel the same. And in my opinion, this is also a trend which goes through balance changes we've had recently as well. If you start to make all the ships very, very similar to each other, it gets a bit boring. What is the point in having a whole bunch of different ships that are all the same? You might as well not have the duplicates. Why play different ships? Why play the game at all if all the ships are the same? There were some exceptions. Not necessarily good. FDR felt very overpowered in the test mechanics just because of the way it is. But I assume that individual ships will be subject to balancing if they are overly affected by any changes, and we saw some balance changes in the dev blog today. Sadly, not any bug fixes, but we saw some balance changes. But would that balance changing then result in FDR being made very, very similar to the other carriers as well? Because the thing that makes it strong is its unique mechanics. And that's going to further erode the identity of the ship, further erode national flavor, and it's going to make the carriers more boring because they're all the same. Overall, the test is more neutral than for surface ship players. I didn't feel particularly positive or negative about it. It felt about the same overall. Possibly slightly negative for the CV players, because you feel powerless in certain situations that surface ships don't feel. So if you're like in a 1v3 or a 1v4 as a surface ship, you still feel like you can do something. You're probably going to lose and you're probably going to sink, but at least you can do something. In the CVs, if there was a blob, you just shut out. You can't do anything. So I felt neutral or maybe slightly negative about the CV play, but it was still enjoyable. So if it went live as it is, I would still play CVs and I would still enjoy them. And the surface ships felt significantly better, especially stealthy ships. And thus ends my feedback that I gave to Wargaming. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Please come and find me on Twitch. Ta-da.